السلام عليكم، يعطيكم العافية بنات. زي ما وعدتكم إن شاء الله أول أكمل محاضرة، لأنهم هم المحاضرات اللي حنبني عليهم كل شغلنا إن شاء الله. للي ما كانوا من الأول معانا حنسجله، ويعني إن شاء الله يعني بيكون بقدر الاستفادة اللي استفدناها لما كنا يعني وجها لوجه. We're going to begin with the first lecture, which was about literature. So what is literature? Now, the idea is that you can't really have one specific definition of literature and say that, okay, this is literature. Why? Because literature is something that keeps changing. Now, it's done by people and for people, and that's why it keeps changing. And one of the things that we mentioned about this is that one day a short story was not considered a part of literature because it had not been invented yet. The novel, same thing, at some point it was not included. Movies, before they were invented, they were not considered literature, and so on. So if we say that literature is what is written, you'd be asking yourself a good question. What about literature that was not written? What about literature that was spoken? So again, is there one specific definition of literature? I think the safe answer is no, because it keeps developing and changing. But I think there are, as you can see in the book, there are 5 elements that we can say that represent what literature can be. So the first thing that we discussed was form and content, and then imagination and creativity, and then subjectivity, and then artistry, and then greatness. Now, regarding form and content, we said that form is how something looks like or how something is done, but the content is what's actually written. Now, if I'm going to draw, for example, a triangle, now it looks like a triangle. This is a triangle. This is the form. But if I write inside the triangle, so inside the triangle, then what is the content? The content is the word in. So simply put, in literature, how something is said or how it looks like, especially when it comes to poetry, how it looks like is part of what it means. People or authors don't just randomly decide on a certain shape or form. They do it intentionally for a certain reason that serves the theme, that serves the topic they want to address in their novel, story, poem, or whatever. Now, what about imagination and creativity? We said that although we have 5 senses, we can consider imagination as our 6th sense. And without imagination, can we really write literature? Because someone might, for example, someone might think of a spaceship. Now, you can't think of a spaceship without imagining it. And in the same way, sorry, in the same way, you can't really think about literature without considering imagination as a key component. Sometimes an incident as clear as I was hit by a car requires a certain amount, or it requires a certain level of imagination, because what is the color of the car? What is the type of the car? What was I wearing? What was I doing? And all of these components of the incident cannot be thought of without imagination. Now, what about creativity? And we're going to go through this in detail, inshallah, in a little bit. Now, being creative differs from one person to another. For example, I say Flan or Ahmed is creative. On what basis have I made that conclusion or assumption? Now, some people are really good at cooking, but are really bad at writing stories. Now, does this mean that they are not creative? Okay, what if it's vice versa? Someone who's really good at writing stories, but is bad at making food, or is good at painting, but is bad at swimming, and so on. So I think the concept is that, or the idea is that being creative is not limited to one aspect of life. If you're good at something and you're doing well at it, then you're creative in your own way. And that's why when we talk about literature, it's difficult to say that a piece of writing is more creative than the other, because how do you decide the language, the incidents, the description, the dialogue, the development of characters, and what if it is intentionally written like that for a particular purpose? So again, is someone more creative than the other? It depends. There is no answer to such question. You can't generalize, okay? So far, we have learned that there is no one specific definition of literature, and we also learned that imagination is our sixth sense, and we also learned that you can't really decide on creativity, but you can appreciate it. And that's why when we talk about criticism, we don't talk about judging a certain piece of writing. No, we're more talking about appreciating it, praising it, looking at what makes it special, what makes it unique, and what makes it creative. What about subjectivity? Now we're going to talk about how, when we write, we use multiple narrations, but the two most used narrations are first person and third person narrations. When we talk about first person narration, we're talking about the use of I, my, mine. That's first person narration. Now, third person narration is he, she, it, they, or we can use a name, Muhammad, Ahmed, Mahmoud. Now, the key difference between saying I, narrating the story with I, and narrating it with he or she or it or a name, is that when maybe I need to further explain this. Now, in a novel or a story, we usually have a narrator, rawi, tamam? So we have a narrator, and this narrator can narrate the story and say, I, يعني مثلا تبدأ القصة, I woke up early, okay? This is the story. Now, in the story, the person who is narrating it is using, again, the first person narration, okay? Now, if I want to tell the story of someone else as a narrator, Karawi, I would say Ahmed woke up early. فالفكرة هنا إنه أنا كراوي ممكن أكون أحكي أنا، يعني الراوي هو اللي بيروي، بيحكي عن حاله، أو يكون بيحكي عن غيره، تمام؟ وهذا إن شاء الله هنشرحه بالتفصيل لما ندخل في the novels, the stories, and even poetry. Okay, moving forward with artistry. Art, it's like literature is a form of art. It's one, that's why we say that we learn English literature, right, at the Islamic University of Gaza, and it is under the Faculty of Arts, okay? So it's a form of art. Greatness, now, when we talk about greatness in literature, we're asking ourselves a question, and the question is, are authors and writers, poets, are they born or are they made? Are they born, or made? And by born, we mean, were they, like, when they were born as babies, did they have the intellect, the gift of writing, or can someone who's old learn how to become a writer? So say I am 35 years old, and I decided to learn how to write short stories. The question is, will I be able to learn this? Will I be able to learn this, let's call it skill? Or should I have been born with the gift of writing? That's the main idea of greatness. Some people are born writers. Can they be taught how to write? Is there an answer to this question? No, we can't really know for sure, because maybe when they turned 35, they learned how to write, but in fact, they actually had it in them. They were already gifted. So if we can come out of something, out of the 5 elements that we just mentioned, is that, again, there is no one specific definition of literature. 2, when how something is said is part of what is meant, is part of the message. And imagination is our 6th sense, because without it, literature would be dull, it would be void. And regarding creativity, being creative cannot be limited to one aspect. It can be a lot of things. Subjectivity, we have first-person narration, we have third-person narration, and we're going to explain them in detail, inshallah, later on. We have artistry, art, it's a form of art. And we never know if someone can be born with a gift, or they grow up and they learn it, because sometimes we have kids who are in kindergarten and you enjoy listening to how they tell a story, so you feel like this person is going to be a great storyteller or a great story writer. And at the same time, sometimes you only discover such talent when they are really old. And so again, is it something they're born with, or something they learn or acquire as they grow older? So let's go through the details. Now, regarding form and content, so like we said, form is how the literary work is done. Content is what it says. Now, if we look at the example here, which is Easter Wings by George Herbert, let me go and fetch the poem. Now, what you're going to notice now is how it's written, how it looks like, and we're going to see how, it looks like wings. I'm just looking for one that, okay, I think this one is good. Okay. Now, if we look at the picture, we're going to see that the poem looks like wings. If I draw, for example, the body here, sorry, it's difficult. Sorry, okay, so you probably can't see. Let me share this again. Now, if we draw the body here and we do this, it looks like wings, right? I didn't draw it well, but it looks like wings. And when we talked about it, we discussed how if like let's read it together. So my tender age is in sorrow to begin and till sorry, I think it's sorrow. Hold on, let me check. Okay. In sorrow, yeah, okay. So let's look at this one. So Lord, who creates man in wealth and store, though foolishly he lost the same, decaying more and more till he became most poor. With thee, oh, let me rise as larks harmoniously and sing this day thy victories, then shall the fall further the flight to me. Now, the idea here in this poem is that if we can notice how he starts talking about the creation of man and how God created man in good state, but then man, referring to Adam, alayhi salam, how he disobeyed God, and as a result, he became most poor, right? So you notice that humans, when they make mistakes and they sin, they are most poor, and we notice that the line gets shorter and shorter. So here the line is long when he talks about what God did. So the line is long, and then it starts getting smaller and smaller until it is the most poor. Good. And how the line shrinks or gets smaller refers to how a person feels weaker. You know, the more sins you commit, the weaker you become, the poorer you feel. And then when he started holding on to God again, with thee, oh, let me rise, you notice that the line starts growing back bigger again to refer to how when he is obedient to God, when he is good to God, when he doesn't commit sins, we notice that the line is big again. The form, again, it looks like wings, right? They look like wings, and the poem is called Easter Wings. If we move forward, my tender age in sorrow did begin, until with sickness and shame thou didst so punish sin that I became most thin. And again, we notice that it begins, the line, this stanza begins with sorrow, begins with the mistakes, begins with the things that man did wrong, and it starts getting smaller and smaller, the line I mean, until it is most thin. And then again, when he starts believing in God, or not believing in God, when he starts depending on God again, with thee, let me combine and feel thy victory, for if I aim my wing on thine, affection shall advance the flight in me. The line grows big again. So what do we see here? We see that how the lines are made, the number of words in each line represent the concept or the idea that the poet wants us to know. Okay, so that's why we say that the content is part of, sorry, the form is part of the content. So if we go back to these slides again, I told the students that you need to know the era, the century, not necessarily the years. يعني مش مطلوب منا نعرف 1593 1633 لكن مطلوب منا نعرف انه 16th century 17th century. So we say late 16th early 17th century. كيف بحسب القرن؟ بضيف واحد على الرقم الموجود عندي، يعني بقول 1593 بضيف لهذا الرقم واحد، يعني هذا بيطلع القرن ال16. بضيف هنا واحد، هذا بيطلع القرن ال17. So we say late 16th early 17th century. طب شو بيفيدنا هذا الكلام؟ بيفيدنا إن شاء الله لما نشرح عن خصائص كل عصر من هذه العصور هنستوعب أكثر ليش شكل هذا القصيدة كذا، إيش كان الكرياتيف، يعني ها إذا بدنا نقول creative aspect بكذا and so on. Like we said, imagination is the sixth senses. We have six senses, sorry, and the sixth one is imagination. Creativity, and if someone says, come on, just give me one definition of creativity, then you say, okay, fine. So if you want a definition, you can't live without a definition, then we might be able to describe creativity as saying things and doing things uniquely and differently. So is the Easter wings a form of creativity? Of course, even though it is about the form and content, but he said it uniquely and differently. So it is creative. Now, one of the examples that I want to show you is Cinderella story. During the lecture, I asked, what do you know about Cinderella story? And everyone said it's about a little girl whose father dies after he gets married to an evil woman with two sisters. And days pass by until one day the prince holds a ball, holds a party, and he invites all the women of the kingdom. And that's when Cinderella goes, he falls in love with her, she loses her shoe, and then he starts looking for the girl whose shoe is the shoe that was lost. And when he goes to their house, to Cinderella's house, the two stepsisters try on the shoe, but one says that the shoe is too tight, and the other says that the shoe is too loose. So neither of the girls gets the chance to be with the prince, and then this shoe fits Cinderella's feet or foot. Now, this is the story that we were told and we were shown, but the real story that was in the collection of stories by the brothers Grimm, يعني هدول الكاتبين الإخوة, they wrote all the fairy tales we know in a book in the 19th century, as we can see in the early 19th century. And the stories were not as, let's say, magical as we are made to believe. The original stories had twists in them, had scary atmosphere in them. So if we can look at an example, is the two sisters were, this is how the story went. This is how the original story went. The two sisters were happy to hear this, for they had pretty feet. When this is when the prince started looking for the feet, or sorry, the girl whose feet fit the shoe. With her mother standing by, the older one took the shoe into her bedroom to try it on. She could not get her big toe into it, for the shoe was too small for her. يعني ما قدرت تدخل الكندرة في رجلها لأنه أصبع رجلها كان كبير كتير. تمام؟ Then her mother gave her a knife and said, cut off your toe. When you are queen, you'll no longer have to go on foot. Now, this part was not included in the version we received about Cinderella. عمرناش حضرنا سندريلا وحدة من خواتها بتقطع إصبع رجلها عشان تلبس إيش؟ الحذاء. يبقى هنا like we move forward. Okay, let's continue. The girl cut off her toe, faced her foot into the shoe, swallowed the pain, and went out to the prince. Now what happens is that يكون في حمام برا على الشجر، والحمام بيشوف إنه البنت هذه قطعة إصبعها، فإيش بيحكوا للأمير؟ روك ديجو روك ديجو. طبعا روك ديجو it sounds like what pigeons do. Rook degoo, rook degoo. Okay, so it sounds like a pigeon. There is blood in the shoe. The shoe is too tight. This bride is not bright. فبينتبه الأمير إنه البنت هذه لابسة الحذاء، وإنه الحذاء مليان دم، وإنه مش هي هذه اللي كانت معاه في الحفلة. نرجع تاني على البيت. The other sister should try on the shoe. She went into her bedroom. الآن الأخت الثانية and got her toes into the shoe all right. دخلوا أصابع رجلها, but her heel was too large. الآن المشكلة صارت في كعبها. Then her mother gave her a knife and said, cut a piece of your heel off your heel. When you are queen, you'll no longer have to go on foot. The girl cut a piece off her heel, forced her foot into the shoe, swallowed the pain, and went out to the prince. وبرضه مين شافها؟ الحمامات. Rock-tigu, there's blood in the shoe. The shoe is too tight. This bride is not right. Then the prince again returns to the house, and he asks Cinderella to try on the shoe. And then when they leave together, what the pigeons say, rook-de-goo, no bloods in the shoe. The shoe's not too tight. This bride is right. So he says that, okay, fine, she's the one whose feet fit the shoe, and or whose foot fit in the shoe. So let's marry her. And he marries her, and they live happily ever after. How is this relevant? شو علاقة هذا الكلام باللي كنا بنشرحه؟ We were explaining the concept of creativity, okay? And this story did not fit the children as an audience. That's why movie makers ever since have been developing the scenario, changing things in order to fit the modern era. An example is in one of the movies about, like, it was a whole entirely Cinderella story, but instead of losing the shoe, she lost her mobile phone. Instead of losing the shoe, she lost her, I think it was her media player, which is a device that has songs on it. So she lost it. And the idea is that such changes make each story creative in its own way, because they said things differently and uniquely. Like we said, subjectivity is the viewpoint of narration. Can be first person and it can be third person. And one of the things that we discussed in the classroom is that using I, first person narration, tamam? So this is what we call first person narration. Using this form of narration or viewpoint is subjective. We can't really trust the person who's talking. Yani we can't trust the narrator, because the narrator is telling us the story from his or her own perspective. عشان هيك أنا لما حد يحكي لي سمعت وشفت أنا يعني استخدام الأنا في هذا السياق بخليني أفقد ثقتي فيه الكلية، يعني ما بثق فيه في كلامه لأنه قاعد بيعرض لي القصة من وجهة نظره. لكن في الناريشن لما يكون third person في نوعين. third person لكن جزء من القصة، يعني هو الراوي وهو أيضا character، شخصية في القصة أو في الرواية، برضو نسبة الثقة بتكونش عالية كتير لأنه هو جزء من الرواية. لكن اللي إحنا حقا يعني لدرجة كبيرة ممكن نثق فيه هو إذا كان الراوي تمام third person narration، لكن بنفس الوقت إيش مش من الرواية، يعني هو بيعرض لنا الأحداث كعين من برا، كحد براقب من بعيد، مش كجزء من الرواية أو شخصية من الرواية أو القصة. We said that literature is a form of art. And finally, regarding greatness, are authors made or born? And we discussed these when we first started the lecture. Okay, moving forward. Those are important statements in the book, and you need to go through them. Where does a story begin? Where does a piece of literature begin? Now, مرات إحنا بنقعد في التاكسي, like we go into a cab, and the taxi driver is talking to one of the passengers, right? يعني السواق بيحكي مع واحد من اللي قاعدين. But we listen to the story from the middle. يعني إحنا ما بنكون من أول ما بدوا يحكوا، فجأة بندخل عليهم على الخط وبنسمع القصة. بنسمع القصة من وين؟ من وسطها. In literature, authors don't always start from the very beginning. Okay, what does that mean? It means that sometimes they start from the middle of events and they start telling us what happened, or they start from the end and again tell us what happened, Sometimes they begin from a certain incident, a letter, uh, a diary, and then again they start telling us what happened. Sometimes they move forward and then they go backward and then forward again. What we want to say here is that the point that the author chooses to start the story with is important to the events. It's important to the meaning or the themes of the story. This means beginnings are not chosen randomly. They are thought of for a particular reason. So we need to ask ourselves when we read a story or a poem or a play or a novel, why did the author begin here? Why did the starting point be the event of going to the sea? Why didn't he start with this or that? Okay, so again, the importance of this part is that you need to ask yourself, why was this chosen to be as a beginning? And in literature, we have something that's referred to as in the beginning from the middle of a story is called in medias res. We have discussed this, so I'll just go. Okay. Now, are narrators and authors the same? شو يعني؟ احنا قلنا انه احنا في عندنا first person narration، صح؟ اللي هو انا بيكون نص الروايه I او القصه I. تمام؟ فبيجي السؤال، هل الراوي هو نفسه الكاتب؟ No. Yes, we don't know. We can't know for sure, okay? Unless we ask the author, are you the narrator? And they say yes or no, we can never be 100% definite or sure about it. That's why I remind you when we first started discussing the topic is that with literature, you can't have one definite answer. You can. You can assume, you can claim, you can have good argument, you can have evidence, but at the end of the day, how sure can you be? You can't. So sometimes, and I gave this example to the students, now let's say we have a story, and this story is about a woman who beats her child, a woman who beats her child. And in real life, the author used to be beaten by his mother. تمام؟ يعني أنا في عندي بتضرب ابنها وهذه القصة، أوكي؟ واللي بتحكي في الرواية أو في القصة هاي الأم هي الراوي، هي اللي بتروي الأحداث، أوكي؟ بتقول 1 2 3. الآن اللي كتب القصة عبارة عن مين؟ عبارة عن طفل يعني في الحقيقة والواقع، هذا الكاتب الأصلي، وهو صغير كانت أمه بتضربه، فلما كبر كتب قصة، بس خلى القصة هاي مين اللي بيرويها في القصة؟ الأم. فهنا إحنا بنحكي إنه is the narrator the author؟ لا، لكن the author can be a character in the novel، لأنه في هاي الرواية أو في هاي القصة الولد اللي قاعد بينضرب هو إيش؟ representing الauthor نفسه في حياته الطبيعية. إيش اللي بدنا نفهمه من هنا؟ إنه لما نكتب ونحلل ما بنقول the author says، ما بنقول the author means، ما بنقول كذا، بنقول the narrator. Okay? ليش؟ لأنه إحنا بنقول إنه إحنا we can't be 100% sure that the narrator is the author. Who is an unreliable narrator? I think we mentioned this. قلنا إنه أنا اللي بيكون first person narration I can't trust them. third person narration حسب إذا كان character بتقل نسبة ثقتي فيه أو ثقتي في كلامه لأنه جزء من الرواية. إذا كان الراوي مش شخصية إنه مش جزء من الأحداث بقول عنه he's probably the most reliable. تمام؟ طيب, we have an example in the book which is Philosophy in the Mirror of Nature by David Foster Wallace. That's 21st century. الفكرة وين؟ في هاي القصة زي ما حكينا. القصة هاي بتحكي عن خليني أختصرها. بتحكي عن شاب، هذا الشاب طالع مع أمه عشان بدهم في الباص، تبدأ يعني في الباص، وبدهم يروحوا على المحامي. ليش بدهم يروحوا على المحامي؟ عشان أمه عملت عمليتين في وجهها، والتنتين العملية الأولى ضرب عصب في وجهها. فبحكي لك إيش بحكي الراوي اللي هو أساساً ابنها، بيقول إنه هو صار وجهها زي كأنها خايفة، فراحت تعمل كمان عملية. طبعاً ليش عملت عملية أساساً؟ كاين في سواد حوالين عينيها، فهي بدها تخلص من هذا السواد، فراحت عملت عملية. لما راحت تعمل العملية ضرب لها هيك عصب، فصار وجهها زي كأنها خايفة. راحوا على دكتور ثاني ضرب كمان عصب، صارت وجهها خايفة أكثر. فهو بيشرح لنا فجأة هيك، بيحكي لنا وأنا كمان عندي قضية فجأة هيك. بعدين بيكمل الكلام بيقول وإحنا ما بنروح، ماما إنه والدته ما بتحب تطلع تروح أي مكان عشان الناس بيشوفوها بس ببين عليها الخوف، وأنا بروح معاها عشان يعني أدير بالي عليها. بعدين بيقول إنه القضية اللي عليه كانت قضية قتل. بعدين بيكمل الكلام وبيقول إنه هو صاروا يتطلعوا فيهم وما بعرف شو. فبنصير هنا نسأل أنفسنا وإحنا بنقرأ، هل أنا بقدر أثق في هذا الراوي اللي بدالي من وين؟ من النص، وقاعد بيحكي لي عن إيش؟ بيحكي لي عن أمه والعملية وهذا، وهو عليه يعني قضية قتل، صح؟ فإيش الأهم المفروض إنك تحكي لي؟ إنه لو إنه هو يعني إيش عادة أنت يعني مثلا بدك تحكي قصة، تحكي في قصتك أنت إنه أنت عليك عقوبة قتل أو عليك قضية قتل، ولا بتقعد تحكي في العملية ونقعد في الباص وقاعدين في الباص ومن هذا الكلام؟ فطريقة عرض القصة بتخلينا نشك في هذا الكاتب، في هذا عفوا الراوي، وبنفس الوقت بتخلينا نتساءل طب هي ليش عينيها سود؟ هو بالآخر بيحكي في القصة بيقول إنه أنا جدة وكبير وقوي وكذا، عشان هيك هي بتحب تاخدني معها. فبصير السؤال اللي أنا المفروض الأسئلة المنطقية اللي أنا أسألها إنه هي ليش في تحت عينيها سواد؟ وهو يعني لما بيقول إنه هي الوجه علق على شكل الخوف، يعني طب ليش الخوف مش أي شعور تاني؟ طيب أنت بتقول إنه أنت جدة وبتروح معها عشان محدش يحكي عليها، فإحنا بنصير نتساءل طب ما هو مش يمكن هو اللي بيخوفها وهو اللي بيروح معها عشان آه آه ما تحكيش لحد إيش هو عامل فيها، خصوصاً إنه مرة تانية إنه الوجه اللي هو بيوصف هو صار عندها هو وجه الخوف، فهي خايفة من مين؟ طيب وكونه إنه هو مطلوب لجريمة قتل و بتخلينا نطرح بعض التساؤلات المنطقية اللي نقدر ندعمها بأدلة من القصة نفسها. Now, again, why did we discuss this story? It's because it begins from the middle, because the narrator is not necessarily the author, and because the narrator cannot be 100% trusted. This story is a part of a collection of stories in a book called Oblivion. Yani, our author, David Foster Wallace, he wrote a collection of stories in a book called Oblivion. One of these stories is Philosophy and the Mirror of Nature. Never trust the artist, trust the tale. I think this relates mainly to the concept of don't busy yourself wondering about the author and start analyzing the text. This quote was said by David Herbert Lawrence, 19th-20th century. These names are important for you to remember. We have Lord Byron, late 18, early 19, Oscar Wilde, late 19, early 20th century. And these poets use the self in the writings, which means they use the first person narration in their writings. So to sum up what literature is, it plays out between form and meaning, form and content, between narrators and characters, between the author, the reader, and the text, between objective truth and subjective interpretation. This is the general perception or understanding of literature, And like we said, it covers the 5 elements that we discussed.